Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We've got a double-barreled good martini from the campus of Columbia University, which was certainly not what we expected at this time yesterday. But we also have a bad martini in terms of more government dysfunction, and another really bad and crazy martini if the Biden administration actually follows through on what reports are suggesting they might do. So when we last left you, the administrators at Columbia University had completely buckled to the protesters. The 2 p.m. deadline to end the encampment on Monday came and went. And then the demonstrators took over a building, an academic building on campus, barricaded themselves inside, possibly briefly taking hostages. We don't know if that turned out to be true or not. I hope not. Then it got more bizarre before it got good. But part of this bizarre twist is also good because people might think in general, oh, these kids, they go to an elite university. They're deep thinkers. They believe in their cause. No, they're ridiculous people. Here is what happened yesterday afternoon. This woman named Johanna King-Slutsky, who is also a paid instructor at Columbia University while she's getting her dissertation in, I kid you not, this is the description. My dissertation is on the fantasies of limitless energy in the transatlantic romantic imagination from 1760 to 1860. My goal is to write a prehistory of metabolic rift, Marx's term for the disruption of energy circuits caused by industrialization under capitalism. I am particularly interested in theories of the imagination and poetry as interpreted through a Marxian lens in order to update and propose an alternative to historist ideological critiques of the romantic imagination. Prior to joining Columbia, I worked as a political strategist for leftist and progressive causes and remain active in the higher education labor movement. So undergrad poetry students, I'm sure you're thrilled if you had this lady. But yesterday they took over the building and then they realized, Jim, hey, wait. We don't have any food, so we need to make a stand and treat ourselves like the people in Gaza. Listen to this.
Why should the university be obligated to provide food to people who've taken over a building?
First of all, we're saying that they're obligated to provide food to students who pay for a meal plan here.
But you mentioned that there was a request that food and water be brought in, unless I misunderstood.
To allow it to be brought in. I mean, well, I guess it's ultimately a question of what kind of community and obligation Columbia feels it has to its students. Do you want students to die of dehydration and starvation or get severely ill, even if they disagree with you? If the answer is no, then you should allow basic, I mean, it's crazy to say because we're on an Ivy League campus, but this is like basic humanitarian aid we're asking for. Like, could people please have a glass of water?
But they did put themselves in that, very deliberately, in that situation and in that position. So it seems like you're sort of saying, we want to be revolutionaries, we want to take over this building, now would you please bring us food and water?
Nobody's asking them to bring anything. We're asking them to not violently stop us from bringing in basic humanitarian aid.
They're stopping the delivery of food?
We are looking for a commitment from them that they will not stop it violently.
They haven't stopped it yet.
I don't know to what extent it has been attempted, but we're looking for a commitment.
So they got this, we demand humanitarian aid. Okay, have they actually stopped you from bringing it in? Well, no, but we want to make sure we have that commitment. So they're basically trying to make themselves out to be martyrs here in this ridiculous cause that they've embroiled themselves in. But finally, the school called the cops, which they should have done a long time ago. The cops showed up, declared it a riot, cleared it out, arrested dozens of people out of Hamilton Hall. And then, as they were arresting the students, we'd play the clip, but there are too many expletives. One of the people inside the building is like, well, wait a minute. It's finals. Can I just go home? I'm like, nope, we're arresting you. It's a little too late for that. So,
should have
Jim,
thought of that earlier, pal.
We got this perfect encapsulation of the lunacy of the left. And also the good news that the NYPD finally restored order to Columbia.
So, Greg, my first thought, when you play that clip or any of the audio or video coverage people have seen since these protests began, have you heard a single protester speak where you're like, oh, yes, that person got accepted to an Ivy League school? like who did they turn down? These Like, we have this idea, they're well spoken, they should have great vocabularies. A lot of these people have been in debate. Like, these must be the most articulate voices for their cause. And we get a lot of upspeak where even if you say the sentence, it sounds like a question. But to focus on the positive, Greg, I think last night the police raid on Columbia is the NYPD's finest performance against an extremist making ludicrous demands since Simon Peter Grouper in 1995.
Clearly.
Half our listeners are like, I know where Jim's going with this. As soon as I said NYPD, they heard Jeremy Irons' voice in their head. Also, like life lessons, you're planning a Marxist revolution, bring snacks. Don't count. Ironically, they're socialists. They figured somebody else would do it. They figured somebody else would do. Oh, I was just going to mooch off everybody else. Lo and behold, it didn't work out that way. And if there's any kind of like serious point I want to observe in here, was that you saw that reference to humanitarian aid. Unfortunately, I was able to find it right before we started recording, but there was somebody who I believe was an Iranian activist living overseas who was watching the protests here in the U.S. and who was saying what we're seeing here is genuine victimhood envy on the part of people who are sympathetic to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And there's a whole bunch of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip I am not sympathetic to, most notably Hamas and those who try to justify Hamas. But there are kids there. There are people who do not deserve to be in the situation that they are under bombardment of the Israelis. We can argue whether Israel has put enough effort into trying to minimize civilian casualties against an enemy that intertwines itself into Palestinian society, hides under schools, hides under hospitals, operates underground. But you can genuinely feel bad for the Palestinians and the circumstance that they're in and the way they get used by other Arab countries, waving the bloody shirt but never actually improving their lives. The idea that, and so what it is that these students who have been taught to revere victimhood so highly is that they look at people who are victims and instead of saying, oh, that's terrible, they feel envious. They want to be that. They're like, because that's moral authority. That is stature in their minds. So what we're seeing, they're wearing the keffiyehs, and they're rolling into, they're going into the campus buildings. In one case of a janitor, facility staff, they took a hostage. I mean, that's really emulating Hamas. I guess we should be very glad that the janitor got out in one piece. And then they say, we demand humanitarian aid. They are cosplaying Palestinians. They are pretending to be them and pretending that university administrators, and I guess eventually the NYPD, are Israel and the IDF. All of this is nonsense. All of this is like a delusion going on here. And so it's really kind of, there's a deep sadness to this, but these people were destined to run into the brick wall of reality at a high speed. Better that this happens sooner rather than later.
Exactly. And of course, the far left, just adding fuel to the insane fire here. Last point, Jamal Bowman, him of the fire alarm fame, says, quote, I'm outraged by the level of police presence called upon non-violent student protesters. Really? Were they?
There are a whole bunch of people who keep insisting these are non-violent. And I'm sure you can find certain protesters who are not violent. But there are certainly protesters who are violent. Like you take the guy hostage. They apparently put big, heavy chains. You're taking over a building. You're not violent, right? That's that. Plus, we've seen harassment of Jewish students left, right, and center. We've seen this all over the place. But they keep insisting if they say the word nonviolent enough, that all of a sudden it kind of like will Jedi mind trick us into, I guess they're nonviolent then. No, they're not. And by the way, if you're a nonviolent protester, but you're standing right next to a protester who's getting violent, trouble could come your way. Do not stand, do not, somebody, I think it was, ironically, it was probably the Middle East conflict. Somebody said, do not stand next to somebody throwing rocks at a man with a gun. NBC, the more you know.
The more you know. Bowman says the militarization of college campuses, extensive police presence, and arrest of hundreds of students are in direct opposition to the role of education as a cornerstone of our democracy. And he calls on Columbia's administrators to stop this dangerous escalation before it leads to further harm. So as insane as these people have proven themselves to be, there's still more insanity to come on this issue potentially. So, Jim, in the end, do you think this moves the needle much against the left for how weak they played this from Biden all the way down to the Columbia president and the squad here? Or ultimately, at whatever it is, 6 months from now, we're going to have so many other things to think about that this won't have much of an impact politically.
Yeah. By the way, I've heard some people saying, for the Republicans, it's better the longer this goes on. It's better the worse this gets. and that, don't interfere with your enemy when he's destroying himself or something. And I get that thinking. You and I, when we talk about what fits as a good martini and a bad martini, are often kind of thinking through this stuff. But really, I don't like seeing harassment of Jews on campus. I don't like seeing the harassment of anybody on campus. I don't like seeing violence. I don't like seeing people, campus buildings being taken over. So my attitude is, no, I want to see law and order restored. I don't want to see campuses sinking into anarchy and people feeling threatened by an angry mob and stuff like that. So that's my first take on that one. Whether this will matter in 6 months, I think what this adds to is this growing sense. You throw in the crime rate, you throw in the homeless encampments in cities and the number of mentally ill people encounter on the streets and stuff like that. You throw in the chaos overseas. It feels like a sense just like things are out of control. And restoring order, restoring control is just beyond Biden. He's a tired, exhausted 81-year-old man. And the White House press office can issue as many statements on his behalf, written statements on his behalf as he wants. And then you put him in front of the camera and say, I'm opposed anti-Semitic protests. Also against people who don't know what the Palestinians are going through. I think he's just out of it. And he just seems, completely disconnected to anything. Not just this issue, but a lot of, it's not like he's really connected with the border. It's not like he's really connected. In fact, yesterday, the Biden administration announced they wanted to forgive more student loans. Yeah, great timing on that, pal. The guy's cosplaying Hamas, and you're like, that kid shouldn't have to pay back student loans.
Yeah, let Garrett and Columbus
Let's make life easier for them. Yeah.
Exactly. So when you say law and order, is that in all caps with lots of exclamation points?
Sad like a dog, like Kristi Noem's.
Law and order. Yeah.
Dun dun.
They can get a lot of good episodes out of this, except it'll be at Hudson University. If you watch Law & Order, they have the fictional Hudson University.
And the only one who'd really want to go after him would be Fred Thompson. Jack, I want you to see every one of those snot-nosed punks in upstate in Rikers and give them the smaller port. Oh, they're hungry? Well, how's he like the slop at Rikers? Anyway, so I need to work on my Fred Thompson. Haven't had much practice. May he rest in peace.
I would also want a Lenny Briscoe one-liner for every protester they put in the wagon.
Yeah, you get an education now, kiddo.
Criminal Justice 101.
Go write a term paper on it,
Oh, I miss Jerry Orbach. He was great. All right. Fast Growing Trees, the biggest online nursery in the U.S. with more than 10,000 different kinds of plants and more than 2 million happy customers in the United States. They have everything you could possibly want, like fruit trees, palm trees, evergreens, houseplants, and so much more.
Whatever you're interested in, they have it for you. You can find the perfect fit for your climate and space. Fast Growing Trees makes it easy to order online, and your plants are shipped directly to your door in just 1 or 2 days. And along with their 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, they offer free plant consultation forever.
It's May 1st, so if you haven't begun the planting in your flower bed or brought new plants into your homes, this is a perfect time to do it. They will guide you through the process and how to specifically care for these plants. We love our big plants, we love our little plants, and we even love our new spices, the basil and the oregano. And this spring, Fast Growing Trees has the best deals online, up to half off on select plants and other deals. Listeners to the 3 Martini Lunch get an additional 15% off your first purchase when using the code Martini at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code Martini at checkout. fastgrowingtrees.com, code Martini. The offer is valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions may apply. All right, on to our bad martini now. And if you were with us on Monday, you know that we talked about the FBI's convoluted system for localities reporting their crime stats. So convoluted that big cities like Chicago, LA, and others just didn't use it because it was too cumbersome. So finally, the FBI went back to the old system and their numbers still don't match up. But in the course of that conversation, we talked about how this is a pattern of government websites and other supposedly high-tech, consumer-friendly programs simply not working. We referenced healthcare.gov from a little over a decade ago. And Jim also talked about how the financial aid forms online are becoming a huge problem for families with kids graduating this year and about to go to college. Things are very much delayed. It's the subject of your Morning Jolt today. Again, it's the beginning of May. People need to be making decisions about where they want to go to school. Probably not Columbia in the fall, but it's time to make those decisions. And knowing what you will have to pay is a big part of making that decision. So, Jim, what have you been able to uncover?
Yeah, this has been on my to-do list to write about for a while, and it's every bit, once I dug into it for today's piece, it's every bit as bad as you'd imagine. Free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA program. And by the way, it's not just financial aid in terms of loans. It also has Pell Grants, the subsidized loans, the unsubsidized loans, the federal work-study program. So if you're like, I don't like, the Department of Education, I don't think we should be making these loans. Well, look, there are kids who win scholarships. Kids who get Pell Grants. We do just sometimes give kids for being really promising, getting good grades. And traditionally May 1st was decision day, and where you had to decide, yes, I'm going to this school. Now the good news is almost every school has extended it to at least June 1st, recognizing that students don't have all the information. That right now, I think the number I saw was roughly 85% of all U.S. college students require some form of financial aid, either a scholarship or a loan. Or some other assistance like that. And as you mentioned, for those who are lucky enough to get into more than one school, often the financial aid decision is, if not the deciding factor, a very important factor in that, if there's a big difference in there. And I happen to know a bunch of families that are going through this, where they don't know. They certainly know where they want to go, but they don't really know how much they're actually going to have to pony up themselves, how much they can get through loans, and whether they qualify for a Pell Grant. And this was overhaul. It was required by Congress, but was passed back in 2020. So you're seeing occasional coverage. Really, this goes back to the problem of the Trump administration. No. Biden's team has been on the job for this for 3 years. And they contracted out to General Dynamics Information Technology. When I think of General Dynamics, I usually think of those fine American-built bombs blowing up stuff in other places, but they also run information technology systems for the U.S. government. And they got a $125 million contract to overhaul this system. Apparently early on in the process, they were saying this is a bigger and more complicated job than you guys made this sound like. It's going to be delayed. Now, you're seeing the likes of Elizabeth Warren and other Democratic senators. It's those darn federal contractors, which, look, you can find federal contractors who screwed up. The example of healthcare.gov is a very vivid and memorable case of that. But there's also that question of what was the U.S. Department of Education doing while these delays were mounting? It was increasingly clear the system was not going to be ready when it needed to be ready. Well, the answer is they were trying to get through Biden's student loan forgiveness. And you can find people within the U.S. Department of Education who want to see this program succeed, who said one of the reasons this turned into such a crisis is that this really wasn't a top priority, and everybody thought everybody else was going to do it. So blame goes, number one, to Cardona, the Secretary of Education. But however, the guy who really is to blame is Richard Cordray. Now, Richard Cordray, why do I know that name? One of Elizabeth Warren's best buddies, the first head of the Consumer Protection Financial Department over there. He had no experience in student loans, which is, a lot of people were a little wary about when he was named, but everybody's, he's going to do a great job. Cordray is resigning this week. It's totally unrelated to how screwed up this is. Spending more time with his family that probably hates him if they have to apply for a student loan this year. And so he's leaving. Screw-ups are going to happen in government, which I don't like. In fact, I really hate. And I think it's a big, strong argument of why we need a smaller federal government, because federal government that tries to do everything is going to trip over its shoelaces every single time. If everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, right? I want a government that focuses on the really important duties. But instead, Cardona says, no, we are grateful for Rich Cordray's 3 years of service in which he accomplished more transformational changes to the student aid system than any of his predecessors. Yeah, by screwing it all up! Greg, this is kind of like saying the Unabomber did more to spur discussions of technology changes than anybody else. Yes, he did. In a terrible, terrible way. And of course, the statement continues, it's no exaggeration to say that Rich helped change millions of lives for the better. Shut up! Like, if you screw up that, can we get rid of the standard pro forma, attaboy, great job statement from the boss? Can't we say, don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you? Just get out because you screwed up? And one of the things that just kind of drives me crazy about this is, Richard Cordray is going to be fine. Like, he's going to go off and probably join a consulting firm or a law firm. He completely screwed up, completely dropped the ball. There are probably hundreds of thousands of American seniors who don't know where they're going, and their lives are screwed up. Families are tearing their hair out. There's not going to be any real consequence to this guy. The only way I can think of this being a consequence to this guy, Cordray, is if he decides to go to work for a university. Because the moment he says to his students, hey, you know, I ran the FAFSA program in 2024, he might as well say I love Israel. That's the kind of reaction you're going to get from college students.
No, that's exactly right. Now, the feds have been intertwined in federal student aid for a long time. Hillsdale famously had a Supreme Court case in the 80s because while they rejected other federal funding, they did accept federal loans at the time. So the federal government said, well, that means we can kind of dictate your policies and curriculum. Hillsdale said no. Hillsdale lost, so they don't take any federal aid whatsoever. But, Jim, they also really added government control to a much larger extent during the Obamacare legislation. They kind of just threw that in at the last second like it was some minor amendment. And as usual, the more the government runs something, the less well it runs. So if this was largely being operated through the private sector, which it was to a larger extent before, I have a feeling we wouldn't have this giant mess.
Yeah, look, I mean, you know, one of the things that why the federal government should not run things like this is because there is no alternative. When the Department of Education says, hey, we were supposed to have this thing ready months ago, and it's not like, for example, you say to them, if one of your parents doesn't have a Social Security number, it couldn't process the application at all. Now, in case I looked it up, there's like 17 million kids who have one U.S. citizen parent and one non-U.S. citizen parent. Doesn't mean the parent's in the country illegally. It might be in some cases, but often, you know, if your parent is still a citizen of another country, they won't have a Social Security. They just didn't have any ability to process that. Now the Department of Education says, we fixed it as of April 30th, which was yesterday.
Sure they
so
have.
when they say, you know, the other thing, which is also a good example, so this was like legally required to be ready to go by January 1st. According to my colleague Dan McLaughlin and several other sources who are in the know, they did on December 30th, they turned on the system for 30 minutes. It didn't work, but they turned it off after 30 minutes. And thus they made the deadline that they were legally required to by saying it was like there is so much butt covering. And I'm sitting there thinking like, but the system doesn't work, right? It doesn't matter if you turned it on for 30 minutes before the end of the year deadline. But that's the way these people think. It's like, well, you know, we checked the boxes on all the paperwork, therefore the problem is solved. No, it's not, because nobody can get the paperwork through. And as I say, they're like, if you apply for a loan at a bank, the bank says no. That stinks, but you could at least go to another bank. And maybe you feel like every bank's going to treat you the same way, but like there's at least the option. There's at least the concept of competition. When you are reliant on the U.S. Department of Education to process all the financial aid paperwork, you have no other option. You can't go to like Norway's Department of Education and try to get them to do it or something like that because they seem more competent. And that is why it's such a potential disaster to have the federal government running systems like this.
Yes. Runs far worse and probably costs way more, even though it still doesn't work. So that's the government for you. All right, well, let's go for the Biden administration trifecta of failure today. The weak response to Colombia, not having financial aid forms and that whole process ready to go. Probably still don't, but we'll see how it goes now here going forward. Now they've come up with another really stupid idea, and that is that the White House, according to CBS News, is considering welcoming some Palestinians from Gaza as refugees. This is the story. The Biden administration is considering bringing certain Palestinians to the U.S. as refugees, a move that would offer a permanent safe haven to some of those fleeing Gaza. This is according to internal federal government documents. Senior officials across several federal U.S. agencies have discussed the practicality of different options to resettle Palestinians from Gaza who have immediate family members who are American citizens or permanent residents. One of those proposals involves using the decades-old United States Refugee Admissions Program to welcome Palestinians with U.S. ties who have managed to escape Gaza and enter neighboring Egypt. So this idea of bringing in Gaza refugees, I don't know what number they're thinking of, Jim, but there's a reason Egypt and Jordan and all these other seemingly sympathetic neighbors say absolutely no. We don't want these people here. Also, we've seen the polls where huge majorities of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank heartily approve of the October 7th Hamas attacks against Israel. So you have to think that would be the mindset of at least a decent chunk of them. And then finally, this poll is a little bit old. It's from 2014. But a poll of people in the Palestinian territories, what do you think of the United States? 76% consider us an enemy. So you tell me how this is beneficial to the United States, because I don't see it.
Yeah, no, Greg, I was going to observe that too anti-Semitic for the Egyptians and Jordanians is a really high bar to clear. And yet somehow the Palestinians managed to do that. That's kind of like, being considered too racist for the Klan. Yeah. Well, Billy Bob, I can't let you talk about people like that. That's going too far. Yeah, I heard this and I'm like, does Biden want to win? Like, one, because he announced, we're going to forgive some student loans right as the student protesters are cosplaying terrorism on Columbia University. But then he also says, we're going to bring in the actual terrorists. We're going to bring, presumably we'd be vetting these people. But as you mentioned, like, this is a population where, like, they're on their hand, they're saying down with USA. They go onto video and you saw them throwing out the food aid that was parachuted in there. By the way, all the U.S. parachutes deployed. I just want to clarify, because I know somebody out there, maybe the Jordanians, maybe somebody's parachute didn't deploy and they killed like 5 people because the crate landed on them and they died. But that's not our fault. That's one of our allies. There were Palestinians who were so angry at the U.S. Like, we would rather starve than accept your aid. To which we say, fine, as any parent who's dealt with a toddler who refuses to eat. Fine, go to your room, see if you get any. That, like, why are we building them up here? Why are we constantly bending over backwards to try to help people who will keep telling us how much they hate us? And the idea is because, Joe Biden really wants to win the state of Michigan, and he thinks to do it, he's got to win Dearborn. That's what is shaping our foreign policy these days.
The weakness that he's displaying on this issue in so many different facets it invites more aggression.
Almost like you shouldn't nominate octogenarians. Almost like
You can easily argue that Afghanistan and our debacle there motivated Putin, motivated Hamas, motivated Iran, and now this groveling, it's just going to invite more.
Everybody sees him as a pushover. Everyone sees him as a chump, easy pickings, and that they can get whatever they want from him. And Biden was never the toughest of guys to begin with, despite what he tells us about corn pop. But everybody in the world knows it, and it's just getting worse. Good luck, America.
Yeah, that's a pretty sobering way to end the day. But hey, we had a lot of fun with the first one, so we're going to hang our hat on that for the day. And Jim, I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Columbus of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast and ask your friends to do the same. Also, thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. They're a big help to us. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. And follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a fantastic Wednesday and join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.